I've been to hell. Here's what to expect. Downward spiral. I didn't even notice that I was in hell my first year. Every day seemed the same, minus the one particular detail that nothing good ever happened. Ever. I had a secure job, relationship, and life, but it all fell apart. All those little doubts I had about myself ate away at me until they were full-blown paranoia. And then, it soon became my reality. My company kept suffering loss after loss until the problems were eventually pinpointed to being solely my fault. After I lost my job, I lost my fiancée to my best friend, none other. And no one seemed to be on my side. Every person in my life was cold and distant. Even the little things that didn't matter were awful. Food always tasted terrible. My favorite shows were canceled. And something inside my apartment always was in need of repair. Each day was cold, with rainy overcast, and the nights were eerily dark, with no stars or moonlight. There is absolutely no enjoyment in hell. But the first year is child's play compared to the rest. Silence. During the second year, I came to two possible conclusions. The first was that I had gone completely insane. And the second was that I was no longer in the same world I was born into. It started in the morning when I powered up the TV. The morning news was on, but I couldn't hear anything. I turned the volume up to max, and still nothing. I set the remote down, and I couldn't even hear the sound of it hitting the table. I started to panic, and immediately assumed that I'd lost my hearing. I spoke aloud, and to my surprise, I was able to hear my own voice just fine. I walked down to the corner store. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked directly at me. Everything froze, like time was standing still. My stomach turned, a sea of people just staring in my direction. But their faces weren't clear. Just a jumble of messed up features. Eyes, noses, and mouths all swirled in a mess of flesh, hair, and teeth. Even if I wanted to speak with one of these monstrosities, I couldn't. They remained perfectly still. Dead silence was everywhere I went, and every person stopped and turned in my direction, always watching my every move with their misplaced eyeballs. Hell was studying me, but it only got worse. Seclusion. If you've ever wished to be in complete seclusion, let me be the first to tell you, it isn't worth it. One day, Out of nowhere, I was suddenly completely alone. No more jumble-faced people, animals, cars, or life in general. The world became a hollow remainder of what used to be. And with no other plan in mind, I began to wander. Though the depression soon started to wear on me. Always alone, I had no idea what was going on or where I was at most of the time. Eventually, it became too much, and the loneliness weighed me down so heavily that I gave up. I climbed up the tallest building I could find and jumped off. I could feel the entire impact of the fall. I could hear my bones shatter. Yet, death never came. After 3 agonizing days of lying on the cold, black asphalt, the excruciating pain started to fade, and my body remained intact, even though it should have been completely mangled. Shadows. The suicide attempt seemed to accelerate things, but I was awarded with at least one luxury, and I use the term lightly. I could hear sounds again. It wasn't worth much in an empty world, but nevertheless, it had returned. But, like everything in hell, there was a reason. My hearing allowed the shadows to terrify me on unimaginable levels. I'm not really sure what these things are, but I'll try my best to describe them. Do you know that feeling you get when you're walking in a dark room or going down a flight of stairs in a creepy basement? That feeling that something is right behind you. So you start moving a little faster to reach the light. Now multiply that fear by 100. I would watch glimpses of them out of the corner of my eye. Tall, black humanoid figures darting quickly behind buildings or trees. I could feel them getting closer. The creeping paranoia consuming me. One night, I took a shortcut through an apartment complex. The entrance doors were open, and a flickering fluorescent light partially illuminated the narrow ground floor hallway. Halfway down the corridor, the lights went out completely, and darkness washed over me. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up, and I had the unmistakable feeling that something was behind me. I prepared to run, but it was too late, and with a high-pitched howl, one of the shadows had me. Its cold, dead hands wrapped around my arms as it sank its teeth into the top of my skull. The pain was indescribable. I thrashed around in agony as more shadows emerged from the open apartment doors. In my fit of pain and terror, I pulled my head free from the fangs and stumbled to my feet. Then I ran for what seemed like hours. And I learned quickly that traveling in the evening was no longer an option. I barricaded myself in any shelter I could find every single night. The shadows always paced outside my doors, until each morning, as the dull, gray, cloud-covered sunlight drove them away. Abyss. Eventually, my Namacade lifestyle became impossible to continue. I unlocked the door of the small, two-bedroom house I'd been sleeping in and stepped outside. It was raining, as expected. It was always raining. Despite all that I'd been through, what I saw actually took me by surprise. The first change was the gates. Black, iron bars that had surrounded the neighborhood. They extended from the ground and rose impossibly high into the sky. I was trapped. And the second thing I saw were the jumble-faced people who had now returned. Dozens of them lined up on the street in perfectly straight rows. They were different, though. In groups of 4, dressed in black robes. And they walked hand in hand towards a massive, swimming pool-sized hole in the ground. And without hesitation, groups of 4 would willingly fall in. And after a few seconds, the next would follow suit. I turned around to head back into the home, but I couldn't. The iron bars had closed in and were only a few feet away. I looked back towards the people and saw that the bars across the street had moved in closer as well. It was pushing me towards the hole. I panicked and grabbed the bars with both hands and began to shake them. But they didn't budge. So I started running the entire perimeter, looking for any way out I could find. The bars began to move, ripping through earth and concrete, pushing me closer and closer to the dark abyss. By this time, the rows of people were gone. I planted my feet in the ground and began pushing with all of my strength. But the bars continued to force me closer to the endless hole, despite all my efforts. After a few moments, it was too late. I was right on the edge. I remember clawing at the ground, begging for help. I accepted the inevitable fact that I was going to descend into the darkness. But just before I fell, a flash of light blinded me. Electric pain filled my chest, and I woke up in the emergency room, back on Earth. According to the paramedics, I'd only been dead for a few seconds. I began rambling on about all that I'd seen and been through. No one seemed to acknowledge or believe me. But this story is not a lesson. I'm not telling you to change your life or be a better person. This is a warning. If nothing is going well in your life, it might not be coincidence. You may already be in hell.